Welcome to episode number 1 of my Mythology series. To this point, I've only done videos on TV and film, and that will certainly continue, but with no new movies coming out, I thought it'd be cool to dive in some of the Greek myths, because their impact on storytelling cannot be understated, and many of them have themes and ideas that are still very relevant today. So if you're interested, stick around, relax. I think this should be a lot of fun. As the title reveals, the first story we're going to be looking at is the story of Aeneas of Troy and Dido of Carthage. The story originated from the Roman Virgil, one of the greatest poets to ever live, in his epic the Aeneid, and his use of language is beautiful, so I'll try to read some lines from the Aeneid to help us explore the story. And even if you're not into poetry, and I'm not a huge fan myself, I think you'll at least appreciate Virgil's skill. So to start, who are Aeneas and Dido? Aeneas was a Trojan warrior who fought in the Trojan Wars. He was the son of Venus, or Aphrodite, the goddess of love, passion, pleasure, a ton of other things. And Venus basically started the Trojan War by being declared the most beautiful goddess in the world by the dumbass Paris, but that's another story. Aeneas was probably the second best warrior of the Trojans behind Hector during the Trojan War, and he was one of the favorites of the gods. His impact in the Iliad is fairly brief. Himself and the best Trojan archer Pandarus try to kill Diomedes of Argos, who was on a bloodthirsty rampage at the time, and when they go to attack him, Pandarus gets a spear through the back of his head, and Aeneas almost gets killed himself, but Venus and Apollo bail him out. After the Trojan horse and the sacking of Troy, Aeneas finds out his young wife Creusa was killed by the Greeks, which Virgil describes in this great passage. Kind mother, did you rescue me from fire and sword for this? To see the enemy in the depths of my house, and Ascanius and my father and Creusa slaughtered, thrown together in a heap in one another's blood? After discovering his wife's death, Aeneas leads a fleet of ships filled with Trojan citizens away from the burning city of Troy, and there's a lot more to be said about what Aeneas sees as Troy burns, but for time's sake, we're going to stick with the basics here. Dido, on the other hand, was the founder and queen of Carthage. She did not have an easy life herself. She was born in Tyre, and when her father, who was king, died, her brother Pygmalion took over, and Dido ended up marrying her uncle, who was the priest of Hercules. And as time went on, Pygmalion got word that her husband buried a lot of money somewhere, so he had him killed out of greed. Dido, being clever, had bags of sand thrown into the ocean and claimed it was the hidden fortune, and then she fled from Tyre, leaving her brother's rage. She eventually landed her ships in North Africa, where she got a king to give her some land, and on that land she formed the city of Carthage. So how did the two end up meeting? It is quite the journey, to say the least. After leaving Troy, Aeneas takes his people to Thrace, where a friend of his was murdered, and the land is cursed, and it just does not work out, so they go to Crete, but again they run into problems that pushes them elsewhere. And during their adventures, they're constantly being harassed by Juno, who is still bitter that a Trojan thought Venus was more beautiful than her. Classic Juno. At one point, Aeneas and his people land on the Strophates Islands, and they run into Hector's widow Andromache, who thinks he's a ghost, and it's a pretty interesting encounter. I think her farewell to Hector in the Iliad is probably one of the most touching scenes in all of literature, but Aeneas and his people eventually move on from that island as well and land in North Africa. When Aeneas and his people land in North Africa, Venus comes to Aeneas and tells him to go to Queen Dido, where he and his people can settle down for a bit, and when they arrive, we get a scene straight out of a Lifetime movie. A few of Aeneas' men go to see Dido, and she's kind of already heard some things about him. He's the son of Venus and a prince of Troy. But his men, basically wingmen, talk up Aeneas and tell her he's landed, and Virgil gives us Dido's reaction. I will send and search the coast from end to end. If happily wandering up and down, he bide in woodland or in town. And apologies for my poetry readings. I don't think I give them the passion they deserve, but, it is what it is. But of course, after Dido says this, Aeneas steps out in all of his glory, and again, he's the son of Venus. So think of this warrior stepping out, and I'm sure rays of light are coming down on him perfectly, and he basically just says, "Hey, I'm Aeneas." Dido immediately throws a banquet in honor of his arrival, and at this banquet, Aeneas tells Dido of his adventures, as I'm sure he did with every queen he ran into, and then Venus sends Aeneas' half-brother Eros, or Cupid, to hit Dido with an arrow to make her fall in love with Aeneas, which he ends up doing. Now, do I think this is necessary? Probably not, even though Dido's husband was killed. It's Aeneas, so I think she's falling in love with him no matter what, but Venus wasn't taking any chances. Now, this is where the moral of the story comes in. After fleeing Troy, Aeneas has been told of his destiny, and his destiny is essentially to found the Roman Empire. He's supposed to start the bloodline, which leads to the Roman rulers, and basically encapsulate the principles of Rome. the strength, the discipline, the intelligence, all of those things. But unfortunately for Aeneas, the road to founding Rome was not intended to be paved by flowers and rainbows. It was supposed to be hard and full of death and full of strife. The formation of something as great as Rome required sacrifice. Aeneas knew that truth, but when Dido was in love with him, he did what basically everyone else would have done in that situation. He stayed in Carthage, spent his days drinking wine, nailing the queen, who basically every other man in the city desired, and that was it. So just imagine Aeneas chilling on the terrace of some castle, holding a cigarette, Dido laying on the bed inside. That was his life, and he indulged that life, understandably. But after a year of that lifestyle, Jupiter started paying attention, and this is what he said to Mercury. This is not what his loveliest of mothers suggested to me, nor why she rescued him twice from Greek armies. He was to be the one who'd rule Italy, pregnant with empire and crying out for war. He'd produce a people of Chaucer's high blood and bring the whole world under the rule of law. Mercury takes this message to Aeneas and basically tells him, "Look, man, I'm happy you're enjoying yourself, but you have an empire to form here, so why don't you put down your cigarettes and resume your destiny?" And Aeneas, to his credit, recognizes that his lifestyle needs to end and departs Carthage, and she ends up committing suicide on a pyre out of heartbreak. Aeneas does encounter Dido again in the underworld, and he explains to her why he did what he did, so it kind of wraps up their story on a slightly less tragic note, but it's still a really sad ending. With that said, there is a message to the story that isn't just explain why you're leaving your girlfriend before you do it. Anything worth doing in life is hard, like going to the gym is harder than laying on the couch and eating Oreos. I would know. But the point of life is not comfort. The point of life is accomplishing things through struggle, and Western culture has seemed to forgot that truth. There was this one insane article written a few days ago, and it's about this one guy who's describing his quarantine experience with his girlfriend and her other boyfriend, and it's sort of hilarious, but also very telling of where we are as a society, because in this article he talks about how it's nice for her to have another guy around, because giving her attention and maintaining a relationship, it's just too hard and inconvenient. And if you ever end up with that perspective, it might be time for some introspection. Aeneas could have chilled out in Carthage for the rest of his life. He could have avoided the wars and the death of his friends and just indulged every pleasure he could possibly imagine until the day of his death. But something greater was calling out to him, which required sacrifice and struggle. Nobody has their destiny written out for them like Aeneas did, but we can still strive for greatness in our own lives through discipline and perseverance and resilience. Will everybody succeed in achieving their goals? Of course not, but that doesn't mean the adventure isn't worth pursuing, because we only have one life, and it'd be better to fail trying to make our lives echo in history rather than succeed at indulging every pleasure our body desires, and that is what the story of Aeneas and Dido is all about. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I had a lot of fun making it, and Aeneas has so many other really cool stories worth talking about, but I think the story of Dido is most relevant to our society today. And subscribe and leave a like if you want to see some more mythology videos. Have a great rest of your day, and hopefully I will talk to you soon. Have a good one.